Hello, I'm Bob Green, Senior Master Sergeant, retired, Oklahoma Air National Guard. While I was growing up, I was born in 1941. Those who served during World War II and later in the Korean conflict, they were larger than life to me. And later, those that also served during the Vietnam era, they were all of my heroes. Veterans Day at Spanish Cove is a very special day for us. It gives us the opportunity to honor those that served, those that put on a uniform and did their duty. I now have the honor of introducing you to some of these folks. Hazel Mills joined the Women's Army Corps and served from 1942 to 1945. She was signed to the Army Air Corps and served on several bases along the West Coast. Hazel was one of the strongest promoters of our Spanish Cove Veterans Day program. She wore her uniform at every one of the programs. Always the soldier, she was buried in her uniform when she passed away in March of 2020.
I understand that you once had an opportunity to see FDR, the president.
Oh, man, I wish I had a picture of him. He came to our base. That was when I was in basic training.
Yeah.
He came to our base and he drove by, and I was on TV. I had on these old physique. I went out, I saluted it, and he returned my salute with a big smile on his face. This is little dog sitting in the back seat of the chair.
What was your best time in the Army? Los Angeles?
Los Angeles, yes.
And then what was your worst?
I just can't think of it. I enjoyed being there. I really enjoyed it.
How old you are?
How old am I?
Yeah.
I am 99.
Congratulations. We've enjoyed visiting with you, Hazel.
Well, thank you.
And we wish you many more.
Well, I do too.
Red Callaways served from 1945 to 1967 as a U.S. Navy aviator. He served in the Navy and the Naval Reserves. During World War II, he flew anti-sub patrol bombers. He later transferred to the Naval Air Transport Command and flew all over the world. Red logged over more than 10,000 hours during his career.
What bases did you live on?
Well, I lived at Atlantic City was the first one with a patrol squadron flying the North Atlantic and looking for submarines that didn't exist. Incidentally, that was where I almost shot myself down in what the Navy's version of a B-24. We were getting rid of some old ordnance that was laying around, and our techniques in submarines or anti-submarine is to drop the ordnance from 200 feet. Well, these ordnance that we dropped had delay fuses on them, but the ones that we were getting rid of and had instant or tenth of a second fuses, and when that hit the water, we got all the shrapnel from the bombs and everything, and that was the closest I got shot down, and I did it myself. So that was my experience in battle, if you would. But I find myself to be my greatest enemy.
If you had it to do all over again?
I'd start earlier.
Marvin Compton served in the U.S. Army 40th Infantry Division. He participated in the Mindanao landing campaign. After that, he was reassigned to the Philippines and later was sent to South Korea until the end of the war.
There were experiences in Leyte in which some of the Japanese had not surrendered. What was the experience in your company?
Well, when we was on Leyte, we had mopping up operations, which lasted not too long. But anyway, my company commander was killed there in Leyte at one of those experiences.
Was your unit then the first unit to go into Mindanao?
Yes, we made an invasion on
You
Mindanao,
made-
and by ship.
Yeah. The agreements in World War II between the U.S. and Russia divided Korea into a north and south. Did you ever see any Russians during your time in Korea?
No, I never saw any of the Russians at all. In fact, the 38th parallel was where the dividing line was, and Incheon, Korea, and Seoul, Korea was on the south.
Yeah.
So I never did get anywhere close to the line.
And if you had it to do again with regard to service to your country, what would you say?
I'd say more people ought to do it. There was too many people that was 4F that wasn't 4F as far as I was concerned.
Barbara Bjork, upon graduating from nursing school, enlisted in the U.S. Army Women's Nursing Corps. She served from 1950 to 1957, including an 18-month stint in Korea during the Korean conflict. She is one of the few nurse anesthetists in the Corps.
Did you see a lot of frontline casualties in your
Yes,
service?
we did. When a GI was injured, he was seen at a battalion aid station, of which there were several across the front lines. And if he could not be returned to duty, then he was rotated on back to a MASH, of which there were 6 across the front line. And if they could not get him back on duty in a certain length of time, he was rotated back to us at the evacuation hospital, of which there were 4 in Korea. And if we couldn't get him back on duty, then he was rotated back to Japan. And then if not back to duty, he was rotated back to the States.
After your military service ended, what was your further career?
I had gotten into anesthesia while I was in Korea, came back to the States and went to school, and that's the only nursing that I've done since, is to give anesthesia.
And what was your rank during the time that you were serving?
I enlisted as a second lieutenant and was discharged as a captain.
If you had it to do over again, what would you say?
Oh, do it in a minute.
Fred Willett served in the U.S. Navy from 1944 to 1946 as an electronics technician mate. He was assigned to the USS Tulagi, an escort carrier. He was later transferred to Stanley Point in the Philippines until his discharge.
You got a bunk on this ship, but it hadn't sailed whenever the Japanese surrendered?
The bunks on my ship are 3 high.
Yeah.
And I forgot where I was. Certainly I never got the bottom bunk. Coming back, that ship, I think the bunks were even higher than that, maybe 5. But the thing is, that ship was preparing to go in for the invasion of Japan.
Sure.
And those kamikazes loved those big aircraft carriers.
Sure
Man,
did.
they'd come in there and they'd run their planes right into they sank a lot of our ships that way.
Yeah.
And it was they had projected that there could be up to 1 million casualties on each side. So people that blame Harry Truman about dropping the atomic bomb and ought to go out there and find 1 million people that would either get killed or maimed by the.
Well, I didn't get a uniform until 2 years later, but I still back Harry Truman.
Yeah, it was I'm sure it was a hard decision for him to make, to drop a atomic bomb on, because I guess it must have killed up to 100,000 people just the first one time.
Yeah.
And then they dropped a second one too about 3 days later. So.
Yep.
But the thing is, it ended the war, and the result would have been the same anyway, except the Americans would have lost all the casualties.
John Radcliffe served from 1944 to 1946 as a heavy equipment operator in a naval construction battalion known as the Seabees. He returned home and joined the U.S. Air Force Reserves, was activated during the Korean conflict. John is a spunky 95-year-old today.
As the invasion started on one side of the island, we was on the other side, and what they was doing was cutting the island off, and then they moved south, securing it, and that was a bloody deal. But the initial invasion, the Japs would head out, and for the first day, it was like a walk in the park. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
And they waited till nothing get ashore, then they cut loose on them. And so that was, but one thing that always bothered me was the Marines at their camp. That I think first, second night, the guard saw the bushes out there moving.
Yeah.
And so they thought it was the Japs and all. And so they just cut loose on them and killed them. And the next morning they went out and looked. And it was women and children trying to give up, and trying to get to the Americans.
Yeah.
And they said, "My God, what have we done?"
Yeah.
But that was about the worst part. But they was in caves a lot, and we tried to get them out of the caves to surrender, and they wouldn't do it. So we had flamethrowers. One, they had portable one to carry on your back, and they had like a tank with a great big one. And so they wouldn't come out, and so we just fired them up and killed them in there and roasted them. And then we just sealed the cave up. And sometimes we seal the cave up while they're still alive. But war is terrible.
Yes.
It just is hard on the civilians as the military.
Right.
They claim there was more civilians killed on Okinawa than there was military. And they estimated there was 20,000 Americans and British casualty that was killed there.
Carol Norman had a unique career. He served 30 years in the U.S. Army, Air Corps, and the U.S. Air Force. He flew with the RAF flying, chasing buzz bombs over England. He did night interdiction missions for the U.S. Third Army. He flew for the U.S. Weather Service and later as a flight tester. He retired as a lieutenant colonel.
You have some friends on the ground who helped you survive for a few days?
No, well, yes, I did, but I don't know who they were or why. When I got shot down in Germany, evidently it was their opposition party. I never knew who they were. A man and his wife, his daughter. It was kind of in a rural area. Went out and picked me up and took me to their house. And I don't know what they did with the airplane, but it was gone the next morning. And nobody ever mentioned the airplane to me. But anyway, I lived with them for a couple of weeks, and until I could move around a little bit, and I'd like to know who they are.
I think they were called partisans.
Probably so. Probably didn't want to be known.
They didn't want to be known.
Ivan Evans Jr. served from 1944 to 1946. He was assigned to the 100th Infantry Division. He saw action in France and Germany. He was wounded. He was awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star for gallantry.
One of the things that we all, when we sit around and talk, that if we did get the final bullet, or final, we all wanted it to be a bullet. We didn't want to be killed by shrapnel from an exploding shell, because it tears you all to pieces.
Yeah.
And how I know this is because we were in a battle and we were being attacked and we didn't have any artillery. You see, there's the forward observer. He has a person with him that has a roll of wire on their back. And as they go forward, that wire rolls off. And this is the way he communicates with the guns.
Yeah.
Well, there had been so much shelling and everything that the wires had been cut and we could not communicate with the guns. Artillery, you know, the artillery guns. And my lieutenant, we were talking, and he said, we're really going to be attacked. We're really outnumbered because we only had about 35 or 40 guys that was able to fight. He said, if we don't get some artillery, we're going to be run over. He said, somebody has got to get back to that CP and tell them how to how they can get to the guns and get artillery up here. And I said, where's that CP? And he told me. I said, well, I'll try to make it. I don't think he thought I could do it, but anyhow, because when I left, he said, if you get to come back, bring us some grenades. So I started running, and I was running along, and I heard two guys hollering at me. They were in a shell crater. And I jumped in that shell crater to try to get my breath, and they said, what are you doing out there? I said, you can't be out there like that, so you're going to get killed. So there's too much small arms fire, and these shells are coming in regular. I said, I got to get back to the CP and tell them we got to have some artillery or we're going to be run over. They said, well, I don't think you can make it. But anyhow, I jumped up and left. Got down there and I told them where we needed to put the artillery. They also sent another forward observer up, and they use walkie-talkies now from the front line to the CP to the guns. They had walkie-talkies. Well, on my way back, I could hear our artillery going over my head, and it was really plastered on. And I thought, well, I was going uphill, and I had those grenades tied on me, all around me. And I just pretty tired. I said, I'm going to take a break here with these guys in this shell crater. But when I got there, they had a direct hit. They were torn all to pieces. They were not in the shell crater. They were laying on the outside, but they were dead. I mean, they were gone. Well, when I got back to the top, I finally got it back to the deal. And that's when I got wounded, right after I got back. But later on, now, we were being shelled pretty heavily. And the guy in the foxhole with me said, they told us there's going to bring up a meal. He said, I'm going to go get that meal. I said, well, I'm not, because they're going to start the shelling again, and I've got a K ration. He said, I'm going. So he got up and left. And Jim, I don't know to this day, I don't remember me deciding to get out of that foxhole. But I got out of the foxhole and started back. It was about 75 yards back behind the line, and I was about halfway, and I heard a big explosion behind me. And I said, man, I wasn't going back to get my lunch, so I didn't have a mess kit. I had my K ration box, So I turned around and went back, and there wasn't a foxhole anymore. It was nothing but a big shell crater. And that's how God took care of me, because I wasn't planning to get out of that foxhole. I was going to stay there and eat that K ration.
Do it all over again? Would you serve your country?
Sure would. Sure would. Our country, we just, freedom, you can't explain. I can't explain how important freedom is. I think we got, maybe in our world today, that people don't realize how fortunate they are to have the freedom that they have. There's one thing about it, how you lived. You didn't think about how close you came to getting hit, and you didn't think about what you did that day. You taught to think about home and good things. I read a chapter in the Bible every day when I could. I read it one way or the other, but sometimes I'd have to just read a few verses at a time. But I usually got in because Irma and I would read the same chapter every day. And you didn't think about what happened that day.
What a privilege we have at Spanish Cove to be surrounded and live among some of the greatest heroes that served our great country. Our veterans have given so much, but I think the most precious gift of all was that they gave us a part of themselves. By serving the United States of America, they served you. It is the veteran who gave us freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, the right to vote, and freedom of religion. It is the veteran who salutes the flag and serves under the flag. From our hearts, we say thank you for keeping us safe. It's painful to our spirits and sad that in the present time we live, we see so many Americans that choose to not see and remember the price that was paid for them to live in freedom. To hear the memories of brave veterans who defended the coastlines, putting forth all they had, doing what they were trained to do, protect and serve. Those who spent months at a time on the seas to navigate and service our aircraft, to keep radio and visual communications open, and to protect our security. We can never grasp the lonely nights spent away from home, the long hours our pilots spent flying a fighter plane to destroy the enemy, the endless hours and loneliness of hiding in a foxhole with a rifle next to their chest, waiting in silence for the unseen enemy to attack, the nurses and the medics who aided our wounded and often whose face was the last they would see. We may never understand what our veterans went through in service and combat. We didn't walk in their path. Their bodies may have become broken, but never their spirit, because they fought for the cause of liberty. They were there for you and me to fight, to defend and protect our right to freedom. Their devotion was to settle for no less than victory that would never be forsaken or forgotten. We are forever grateful, and may we never take for granted the privilege we have to live in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Every time we have the opportunity, let's wave Old Glory high, stand for the stars and stripes, and for those who laid down their lives so we could breathe in freedom. And never forget that freedom isn't free. We've been given freedom's light. God is faithful and good. And until that blessed day, when the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, until we shall forever be with the Lord, let us stand firm together. Our prayer will always be, may God bless America, still the greatest country on the face of this earth.